Uneducated Economist here. In today's video, we are going to be talking about how the CPI is coming down, yet the elevated inflation expectations is still quite prevalent within the economy, and this is having a profound impact on monetary policy that very few people are actually aware of, and today we're going to break this down for you. So to understand what is truly taking place within the monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve, you really have to step away from what it is that you have always known about the traditional methods of the Federal Reserve, which is coming down to interest rate adjustments. Most people focus in on interest rate adjustments being the main monetary policy tool of the Federal Reserve, but since the great financial crisis, they have switched. They no longer use their interest rate adjustments as the main policy tool, but now use more of forward guidance, jawboning, signaling, or what I like to refer to as credible threats. And now the credible threats within the economy is doing something that is quite interesting when you think about how it is that the inflation expectation is still quite elevated, but yet the core CPI is coming down. And I get it that a lot of people are going to say, man, those numbers are fake and they're not real and that they're making them all up and stuff like that. And I would agree. I would agree that the numbers are probably not real. And in fact, if you go and you look at things like FASB 56, which is the government ultimately saying that they are going to fake the numbers for national security reasons, I understand all that. However, if you want to understand what the monetary policy is or understand how it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be conducting themselves going into the future, we have to look at the numbers that they are looking at, because we are trying to figure out what it is that they are doing. And if we are trying to figure out what they are doing so that we can make the most appropriate decisions for ourselves, we have to look at what they are looking at. And they are looking at a core CPI, Consumer Price Index, coming down. This is inflation coming down to the target. Now, I think about it. If we have prevalent inflation expectation that is running rampant through the economy right now, and yet CPI is coming down, what if, right? Suppose, let's hypothetically talk about what would happen to the CPI if the elevated inflation expectation was removed. How low would inflation be? Would it actually be in deflation? I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that if elevated inflation expectation is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the elevated inflation expectation has been quite prevalent within the economy, this self-fulfilling expectation or the self-fulfilling prophecy of elevated inflation expectation should have the core CPI very elevated. But instead, it's coming down to target. If the elevated inflation expectation was removed, core CPI would fall. See, this is where I'm getting at, is that the Federal Reserve was looking, needing, desperately having that elevated inflation expectation, elevated inflation, all of this to save the monetary policy. If you think about the Federal Reserve trying to get to a 2% target, how hard would it have been for them to elevate to a 2% if the inflation expectation is completely removed? This is the true heart of the monetary policy, is that it comes down to what it is that you are thinking and feeling, and how it is that you conduct yourself on accordance to that thoughts and feelings that you are having. So the more that the elevated inflation expectation is pushed into the economy and the lower the CPI is, think about how stimulating this truly is. See, I don't know if anybody really understands how truly stimulating to the economy an elevated inflation expectation has when you have low inflation. CPI is down, elevated inflation expectation does something that is very esoteric. We talk about it a lot here on this channel. There's 58 people watching right now who will probably have a good understanding of this. But if you elevate that inflation expectation, you will raise the neutral interest rate. So this is what we are seeing right now within the economy, is elevated inflation expectation pulling this neutral interest rate ever higher. As the Fed stands still and that neutral interest rate moves ever closer to the Fed funds rate, the economy becomes less restricted. So here we have a less restricted economy than what most people would anticipate. Right? Most people see the Fed funds rate being elevated and this is a restrictive economy, but yet they don't take it into consideration to where the neutral interest rate is in relation to the Fed funds rate. If that neutral interest rate is moving closer to the Fed funds rate, the economy is less restricted. Here we have CPI down. Think about how it is that you get a return on capital investment on an elevated interest rate. Okay? Inflation expectation is elevated. This draws the interest rates higher. You get a return on your capital investment that is higher, but yet the inflation is coming down. This is a stimulating effect to the economy. People wonder why it is we have such a resilient economy. Wondering why it is that the recession seems to be always lingering out there somewhere in the future, but never seems to really come. How it is that people out there some people seem to be killing it, doing very well inside of this exact economy, considering how it is that most people feel about it is very negative. Why? Think about it in this fashion. Think about it not from the obvious, from what it is that we had known from the Federal Reserve throughout our entire lives and how they conduct themselves. Now step away from it a little bit and look at it through the credible threat theory. Everything starts to line up. It starts to make a lot more sense. See, the idea that they were using the physical movement of or not physical, it's all computer digits anyway, but moving the Fed funds rate has got so many people focused in as the main monetary policy tool, it makes it almost impossible for them to see it from a psychological point of view. How it is that they conduct themselves, the Federal Reserve conduct themselves in a way that pushes that elevated inflation expectation. Think about how it is that they're data dependent, right? Even with the threat of tariffs coming down, they still push, oh, well, we don't know what's going to happen with corporate tax or, global taxing or, the breakdown in supply chains. They come up with all these other things beyond that of just tariffs to continue to push that, hey, we got to wait and see. We're in a wait and see pattern. Don't know what we're going to do. I mean, inflation might come ramping back up. This anxiety that they put into the people elevates that neutral interest rate. This is how they're making the economy less restricted. Right? And if prices are coming down and you're getting a decent return on capital investment, how could that not juice the economy? Nobody's going to see it this way, right? Because the traditional methods of learning how the Federal Reserve operates, they don't talk like this. They don't share this sort of information. However, if you go and you read the Federal Reserve speeches, all this stuff starts to make a lot more sense. The credible threat theory is by far the most accurate way of looking at it. Everybody else is going to say something like the Fed doesn't know what they're doing. They're very confused. I mean, even my buddy George Gammon just recently had put out an article talking about how it is that the Federal Reserve is seeing inflationary pressures from the tariffs, but yet he is claiming that the tariffs will be a one-time price rise. See, like inflation is something that is continuously increasing in price. And what George was trying to explain is that the tariff threat is going to be a one-time increase in price. And yet the Federal Reserve is taking it into consideration that this is going to be quite prevalent going into the future. And George is trying to claim something very different about the tariffs. And when I take it back and look at it, I'm like, wait a minute, right there. That is the credible threat theory at work. Right? The Federal Reserve is saying, oh, we got to wait and see. Don't know what's going to happen. Inflation pressures might be coming. We need to keep our interest rates elevated. That is pushing the inflation expectations ever higher. But the reality of the situation, like George is saying, it's a one-time increase. So the expectations will be elevated, but the prices will not be responding in the same fashion. Again, this is to juice the economy. If you have low inflation, actual inflation is low, the CPI comes down, inflation expectation is elevated, neutral interest rate rises ever closer to the Fed funds rate, makes the economy less restricted, you're getting a decent return on capital investment, but yet the CPI is staying low. This is how they're going to juice the economy. Nobody sees it in this fashion because it's not open, like, what am I trying to say? It's overt, right? It's an overt way of stimulating the economy. That way they don't have to come right out and just say, hey, we're going into stimulus packages and a bunch of government spendings and all this other stuff that would typically be known as a stimulating effect or the stimulating response coming from the government. They don't need to do that now. right? So once you see it like this, I mean, to me, I look at like articles like Logan, who is, you know, a Fed official out there, and just even in the statements themselves. Like, I look at the article that I had listed down in the, or posted down in the description of this video. I mean, I look at the article itself, and I think to myself, man, if this is not the credible threat theory in its finest right here. She's pushing it out. Oh, we don't know. Gotta wait and see. Elevated inflation expectation message. Elevated inflation expectation message. Right? And then the reality of the situation, very subdued, right? CPI is down, coming down, meeting the Fed's target, right? Whatever the target is, because they ain't going for a 2% target. They're going for moderately above 2% for some time. And here it is, right? This is exactly what that looks like. All right, let's go through some of these comments here. Let's put our children and grandchildren even more in debt. We need iPhones and Cybertrucks. All right, I heard they're not making Cybertrucks right now. I hear that the sales on them were so low that they actually have stopped the production. Yeah, now, I don't know, that might be a rumor, but... when mainstream media says that Chairman Powell warns of stagflation, is that a credible threat to lower inflation expectations? I don't believe so. I think that the stagflation comments coming from the Federal Reserve, I think, is also going to be inflationary. See, ultimately what they are saying is that the prices are going to stay high, but the people are not going to get their wages moved up, and the actual sales going into the economy is going to be subdued. Right from that. This to me is a very inflationary expectation that they are pushing out there, even though they're calling it stagflation. Anything that they can do, like, think about what it is that they are messaging that's going to raise and lower the neutral interest rate, because I think that's going to be more of the profound tool, right? How they move that neutral interest rate based on the expectations of the messages that they are delivering. If the neutral interest rate falls, the Federal Reserve can start cutting rates and follow the neutral interest rate down and still not be able to make the economy less restricted. People will interpret the move of the Fed lowering rates as being less restrictive or trying to stimulate. But ultimately, if they're following the neutral interest rate down, they're staying not staying neutral, they're staying in position, right? They're not trying to stimulate the economy if they're chasing the neutral interest rate down. They're just trying to keep it from becoming more restricted. So understanding it in this fashion is going to help you so much more than trying to look at the Federal Reserve and the interest rate adjustments based on their, in the interest rate adjustments, thinking that they are trying to either stimulate or restrict the economy by their Fed funds rate adjustments. We have to focus in on the neutral interest rate, because that's the interest rate that is moving when the Fed is standing still. And this is really what I feel is happening within the economy right now, and why so many people misunderstand it. Like even George, who's like very understandable of all these economic theories and the situation that the Federal Reserve is facing right now, is looking at it saying the Federal Reserve is screwing up because they feel that the inflation is going to be higher based on tariffs and the credible threat of tariffs and the being data dependent, but yet the real inflation is coming down, so they're screwing up. This is how a lot of people look at it. A lot of people have this understanding of the Federal Reserve, just like how I just, and described it by the article that George had posted here on his Rebel Capitalist Pro site. But I think about that from the credible threat theory, and it totally lines up. Like if you raise the inflation expectation and the CPI comes down, that's going to juice the economy. And I know that sounds so counterintuitive to the way most people see it, because they don't think about the neutral interest rate rising on that inflation expectation, making the economy less restricted. Low CPI, high return on capital investment, juicing the economy. Don't have to do anything. This is what's awesome about it, is that the Fed doesn't have to lift a finger to make this happen. Isn't that incredible? Right? So all these people say, yeah, man, they have a lot of work to do. They got to do all this. Think about how that's happening. They are able to juice the economy and not even move. They don't have to lift a finger. They can just sit there and on their hands and go like, I got to be data dependent, I guess. Right? And then boom, here you have this stimulating effect that comes to the economy on account of it. The Cybertrucks look dystopian. I live maybe further outskirts of Chicagoland area. I see one every now and then on highway. It's creepy. Yeah, I live in Astoria and I see them every day. There's quite a few of them here now. But I live in an affluent area, so it's like, or more affluent than a lot of areas out there, or becoming. That's what I should say. It's becoming more affluent. There we go. And yeah, there's a few people here in Astoria who have them. All right. So high inflation expectations drives the economy to continue spending and purchasing stocks and other assets, in turn making the economy resilient. Now won't this also cause borrowing costs to rise? Well, yes, but it's also, you're getting a higher return on your capital investment. At the same time, the inflation is subdued. So your return on capital investment is, I mean, I think people look at like borrowing cost as a burden, but I don't know how many people look at the return on their investment as a benefit, right? People are like, oh man, the interest rates are too high, it's going to crash the economy. But yet very few people look at the return on capital investment being higher and that being able to have a return back into the economy, right? Especially when the CPI is low, when the prices are low. So in my mind, it's not necessarily like borrowing to juice the economy, but literally production and savings that has been taking place over the last couple of years as we had the elevated interest rates, given the ability for those people who have that return on capital investment to then participate back into the economy again, all right? All right, got 103 people watching. Keep hitting that like button. When you keep hitting that like button, the YouTube algorithm will pick up the video, spread it around for more people to join in. Thank you so much for everybody being here. 103 people watching with 34 likes. All right, we got dishes in the house. Thank you so much for being here, mamas. All right. The return on capital investment only, it rewards the 1%, not the 99% that lives in poverty. I totally agree with you. I so much agree with you, MRider777. In fact, I would say that it goes a little bit more than just the 1%, but really benefits the top 10% of the people who have the most capital investment, and they get the biggest return, and that's why they are doing 50% of the consuming. That's why they're the most important part, right? Not to me, to the powers that be. The powers that be look at the top 10% because that is such a small group. They're big, right, because of how much money they have, but there's such a small group of the demographics of people. You can either go to the 90% or you can go to the 10%. If you're able to benefit the 10% of the people are out there doing 50% of the consuming. How easy is it to benefit the 10% as opposed to benefiting 90% of the people? You would have to get 90% of the people out there. If you were able to get the money into their hands, give them disposable income, whatever that's supposed to mean, you get income into their hands, how much are they going to actually increase their consumption as opposed to blowing it on, good times or whatever it is out there? When the 10% get that money, right, they spend it in a profound way. They impact the economy more as an individual than we do at the 90%. That's why they don't really care about the 90%. We're like, they basically just do things to appease us. Everything is focused in on the 10% because they do 50% of the consuming. Like, it's not about us. Like, we have to understand that it's not about us. That's why I'm saying you have to own your own economy. If you were part of the 10%, then yeah, maybe you'd be part of the economy with those guys. But we're not, right? We're like insignificant. We're essentially nothing to them. So it's very important that we make it important for our own selves to understand our own economy, to position ourselves in accordance for it, because they are not doing things for us. They're doing things for the 10% because they're doing 50% of the consuming. Why would they even mess with us? It would be too difficult, right? It's much easier to just deal with 10% of the people than 90% of the people. All right, Trump's pump and dump of the markets, never seen this bad before. Simon, how come you can't just take the dollar and change it into digital right now? Why can't you? I'm not understanding the question. I think you can. Are you talking about the powers that be do it? That's a whole other question, and there's a logistical nightmare that comes along with that. So in a single day, you can't do that. If you can phase it out, that would be another story. So there's two different things that you're asking about there. I mean, can you do an instant switch, like essentially remove cash in a single day? Absolutely not. People would lose their damn mind. But can you phase it out over time? That's what's happening. It's happening now, right? Don't think that it's not. All right, all-nighter, Zippy, 90% of the currency is already digital credit. Yep. All right, being part of the 90% is why volatility in markets is so bad. The CPI has not been low since 1977. From what time period are we considering the first data point, CPI, compared to the second data point of CPI being now? I don't think it really matters to look back in the past, because the way that they judge inflation from the past to the way they judge it now isn't the same thing. It's not apples to apples. So if you want to know what's truly happening within the economy and inflation and stuff like that, that would be a good thing to look at. But if you want to know what's going on with the Federal Reserve and monetary policy, that's really pointless. It's really pointless to look at the past like that, because the Fed doesn't, they make up their own number. Like, what difference does it make? All right, if they're like, well, they should really be looking at it this way or that way or whatever, and I was just like, yeah, you're right, they should. They don't, right? And then whether we hope, wish, dream, pray, beg, make them, whatever, they're not going to do it, right? What we have to look at is what it is that they are looking at, so that we can then understand what it is that they are going to do with their monetary policy, because we are not in charge of it, and there's nothing that we can do to change it. So if you want to say, man, they're screwing up, or they're not doing it right, or they're not looking at the right information, we could do that all day long, and that's probably what 99% of the economists do out there. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to say, okay, the Federal Reserve has a monetary policy that they are trying to conduct, and I want to understand it to the fullest that I can, so that I can make appropriate decisions for myself. And I realized, by studying monetary policy through the Fed's own words, their speeches, their documents, and their own words, I was able to realize that there is two communications that are happening, one to the other central bankers and then one to the mainstream media. And it took me a while to figure out why. I thought it was just because the mainstream media would be too confused by the Fed speak. It's not that. That is one of the things. That's true. But it's not the reason why they do it. The reason why they have two different communications is because one of them is deploying critical information to move markets in a particular direction. The forward guidance, signaling, jawbonings, the credible threats. When they communicate through the speeches, they are talking to the other central bankers out there. It's not the same words, it's not the same language. It's a completely different type of communication. I've tried sharing that so many times on this channel. Like, I have a members-only live streams that we do where we break down the Fed speeches in a way that us as average, everyday dudes at our day job can understand. Break this stuff down so that we can understand it, make those decisions for ourselves that are most appropriate. Because when we look at the mainstream media for information about the Federal Reserve, it's pure 100% propagandized information. I know this because of how it is that they have communicated that they were going to do that. They explained it to the other central bankers that this was going to happen, and now here it is, it's occurring, but yet very few people can see it. Very few people understand it to this level. And I'm not trying to say, like, man, I'm some super genius who's like way smarter than everybody else, but I did something that I don't think a lot of other people did. And that is that I took into consideration that the Federal Reserve had a plan, that they knew what they were doing, right? I didn't know that they were going to use the credible threat of COVID, or not the credible threat of it, the reality of COVID, to push the inflation expectations ever higher. See, here's the thing. There was a makeup strategy that the Federal Reserve was going to deploy. This was in 2019. They were going to deploy it in 2020, right? You can go and look it up yourself. Makeup strategies from the Federal Reserve, how robust is it, or something of that nature. There was a plan, like a 20-page document detailing out the plan to push elevated inflation expectations higher. That plan, that makeup strategy document, became irrelevant during COVID because the inflation expectation and the actual inflation from supply chain breakdowns and all that other stuff pushed the inflation higher. They no longer needed to use a strategy to create inflation that was higher. Inflation was just automatically happening because of the COVID pandemic. Now, here's something interesting to think about, right? Where would we be today had COVID not happened, but the makeup strategy did? See, now this is something that I don't know how many people are aware that there was a makeup strategy, but this is something that I think about. It was like, if the COVID pandemic had not occurred, the supply chain breakdown, the push up in inflation and all that other stuff, had that not taken place, where would we be today had the Federal Reserve deployed the makeup strategy and put it to work? Would we not be too far off from where we are? I mean, they were talking about letting inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time and have inflation moderately above 2% for some time. Here we are. Regardless of COVID or regardless of the plan to do it, this is occurring. Now, there might have been some differences in the way that the people might be feeling about how the Federal Reserve conducted themselves, like basically thinking, okay, maybe had the makeup strategy been deployed and worked, the people would have more confidence in the Fed today. I mean, maybe that might take place because it was more of a systematic process that they went down, as opposed to being hit with this pandemic and trying to fly on the seat of their pants to figure it out. So maybe the people's feelings about the Federal Reserve might have a slight more confidence to it today than it does because of the pandemic. But that would be it, right? That would be the only difference that I could think of, because this is where they wanted to be. In 2019, if you were to ask the Federal Reserve, where do you want to be? This is where it would be. Right here, right now, doing this. All right? And that's why I find this so, like, I don't know, like, it's not necessarily into the idea of frustrations. Like, I'm not frustrated by anything out there, but I find it just like, I find it completely odd that nobody else sees it like this. Like, I'm literally the only one. Like, I cannot find anybody else to say, man, I'm falling right in line, like any other economist, any other news article, anybody. Like, literally nobody. But yet I can find all this information quite easily through the Federal Reserve's own words. Right? Not the words that they use in the mainstream media, but the ones that they use to the other central bankers. Like, how could it be anything else? It can't. And anybody else who is really talking about the Federal Reserve is talking about them like they screwed up. They don't know what they're doing. They're making mistakes, all this other stuff. And I feel like I am the only one who said, this is what they said that they wanted to do. All right? And here they are. Like, I'm not happy about it. Like, I'm not like, all right, they're winners, yeah, whatever. Like, no, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is, like, 7 years ago, they said that this was the position that they wanted to be in. Here it is. And people are saying they screwed up. And I'm thinking, I don't think so. No, no. This is very much in line with what it is that they were hoping for. And now you think about it, they can sit still and just push perception. This is perception-based leverage marketing. That's what it is. Perception-based leverage marketing. I just invented a new acronym, right? A new whatever it is, a new Fed alphabet for you guys to internalize, right? CTT and PBLM, they're essentially the same thing. Credible threat theory and perception-based leverage marketing. Does the 90% make the economy bad, or does the 10% have more to say in the economy? Does it make it bad? Is there such thing as a good or bad economy? Does it make it bad? No. I just think it's the situation that we are now facing. Right? Is this the position that we are now in? Is it bad or good? I think that's really all in the meaning that you're giving it. I don't think it's a good or bad thing. It's just an is, right? I don't think the Fed is good or bad. I don't think gold is good or bad. I don't think Bitcoin is good or bad. I don't think anything is good or bad. The only thing I think is good or bad is the decisions that I'm making on accordance to the meaning that I'm giving things. That's good or bad, right? Everything else is a neutral. It's just like, it just is what it is, right? The only difference in what that is the meaning that I've given it. Nothing has any other meaning other than the meaning I give it. Some people look at this and go like, oh man, the Fed screwed up. They don't know what they're doing. It's making pain and misery for me. Other people are like, I'm doing quite well. Not bad. Right? You're like, it's pretty bad. For me, not bad. You know, I mean, it depends. It's just, there is no good or bad. You just have to, it's all about your understanding and your position. That's it. That's it. I got a brake job to do for it, buddy. I'm stalling. What's happening, Wayne? It's great to see you up in here, brother. All right. Getting a new mortgage HELOC every 8 years probably reflects the needs to create a cash flow in personal lives. In a rising rates environment, people will have to move down the consumption spectrum. I mean, in a rising rate environment, people will have to move down the consumption spectrum if they are not deployed into capital investments, right? Because the rising interest rate environment will give them more capital if they are positioned in capital, you know, if they position their capital for a return, right? Is there a society where wealth isn't split, where the top 10% or 1% doesn't have most things? Justin, yeah, but it's not a permanent fixture. It's a part of the cycle, right? I mean, if you go from a emerging economy, right, and you start rising and you become very productive and you're industrious and you start raising your standard of living because you're producing and distributing stuff out there to the world, right? You're going to have a rising middle class that's built off of that. This is how like people misunderstand the economy, is that they want to go back to what it is that the cycle has moved into, right? So we went from a poor nation into an industrialized revolution nation. Standard of living rises. We get our standard of living to rise. All of a sudden now our manufacturing can't compete with the foreign producers out there. The foreign producers start bringing in their products. Our domestic manufacturers start to leave, right? And the cycle just keeps getting bigger and bigger as the separation between the rich and the poor grow more and more. It's called the Cantillon effect. Right? And so once you understand the Cantillon effect, there's no way that there is a society that can maintain, right? It's going through a cyclical thing. Like really, I mean, if you worked really, really, really hard and you were able to acquire something in your life, and then you're like thinking, man, I would like to work extra hard and acquire more, but then you couldn't do that. Right? Like you're like, no, I want to work hard because I want another car and I want a second house. Can't do that, right? You can work hard, produce money, right, and get some money, but you have to deploy that money back into production and savings, because if you don't do that, you'll get inequality, right? Separation between the rich and the poor. And that's the problem that we face, is that you can't stop it from taking place because people want to work hard, build up a savings, and then use that savings to make a life better. And that move to make your life better is the move into luxuries, and it's the separation between the rich and the poor. That's why you can't stop it. There is no stopping it. Don't try to think of a way to stop it, because it's not going to work, right? I mean, you're going to have to be fighting against economic forces. It's better to understand where you are in this cycle so that you can appropriately position yourself for it. See, there was a time, if we were talking 50 years ago, there would have been a great time that the average dude could just go and get some really decent manufacturing job out there, be dedicated to that job, show up every single day, be somewhat disciplined with your paycheck, right? Put a decent amount into a retirement fund and absolutely be fine. You'll have the house, the cars, the retirement, all the other stuff that everybody could have ever imagined for the American dream. There was a time in this country which that was capable from just a regular job, right? We are no longer in that cycle. That cycle has moved beyond to where we are today, right? It is like there's no returning back to that. So it's best to understand that we are now in a new era. We are in a new time in which that we need to conduct ourselves differently. We can't go and expect the powers that be out there to create an environment in which a good manufacturing job is going to produce what it is that it used to. A good job sucks, and it sucks now because of the Cantillon effect. Because of all the new money that has come in, the huge separation between the rich and the poor, all the good manufacturing jobs going over to foreign producers, the foreign producers sending us their stuff, right? This is not something that is to be blamed on the powers that be, on the administrations or government or anything else, when you can find this so accurately described hundreds of years ago in Cantillon's essay, right? I mean, if you want to ignore the essay and say, that's bullshit, and I'm just going to go and look at the government and blame them for everything, then you will miss the underlying economic forces that are creating the pain and misery that we are now experiencing, like having a good job that sucks. You know, people, if your good job sucks and you want to blame government for it, you're blaming, go for it, man. But it's not going to work because there's nothing that they can do. There's literally nothing that they can do. The problem that came was the move into luxuries that our grandfather, that our, everybody else ahead of us had done. All our family, all the people who were working, who built up this country, made this thing the greatest country in the world, producing all the world's greatest stuff, and then taking that effort, that time, that energy that they had done to create this great industrious country that produced all this wonderful stuff, they took that effort, time, and energy that they had received for that, they increased their standard of living and screwed it up. And it wasn't their fault. That's what people do, right? They work hard, they save, they produce like that so that they can have a better way of life. And that move into luxuries is the problem. There's nothing else that can be done. Right? You stop people from moving into luxuries, it's like a boot on the face of humanity. Okay? I mean, if you want to see how it is that governments control this, look at communist countries. They stop people from moving into luxuries. They take the production, right? No, don't produce that much, right? For you as an individual, you need to produce that much for all of us as a whole. Right? Because if you produce that much for yourself as an individual, you are going to buy into luxuries and you're going to separate yourself from everybody else, and we're going to have this huge problem that we face like now here in the United States. So them attempting to stop that from happening looks just like a communist country. Let's see here. The biggest problem, we are spoiled. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. All right. Let's see here. Is there a chart where you can see this Cantillon effect is where you can see every country is in the cycle? No, I doubt it. I mean, you know how many people actually understand the Cantillon effect? I mean, I listen to even hardcore economists who I totally respect, know and respect, describe the Cantillon effect inaccurately. Or not to the full extent, right? Sometimes it's just a little piece of the Cantillon effect, but not really understanding it or using it to its fullest. Most people just look at the Cantillon effect as new money coming in, and people who are closest to the new money separate themselves from everybody else because they have access to it, spending it at face value, and they leave it at that. Like, that's about the extent of their Cantillon, the understanding of Cantillon effect. But it's so much more deeper than that. I mean, it goes way, way deeper than that. And since most people don't understand how that works or why it's going down that way, why these economic forces do this, since most people don't understand it, what they don't understand, they fear and they blame government, right? And that's why you're probably not going to find a chart or anybody else who really discusses it to the level that we do. I mean, there's people out there who I'm sure are far smarter on this than I am, but they probably don't have a YouTube channel, right? Or if they do, they're not very popular or something. I mean, you think about it, is it funner to watch a video where you really have to think about what it is that the Federal Reserve is trying to do, considering that they will not explain it out there? Or is it funner to listen to somebody who tells you that the government is coming in to destroy our lives and ruin everything and create all this pain and havoc for everybody? Because those videos are super popular, right? People love to know how they're going to die, but to try and actually take in a moment to say, okay, I have to actually pay attention to what this means, internalize the information, process it, and then deploy it back into my life. You know how hard that is for people to do? Like, it's almost impossible. 174 people watching right now. We're the hardcore people who actually try to understand what it is that's taking place within the economy. Everybody else, they're just flying in the wind, man. All right. Okay, the what effect? It's called the Cantillon effect. In fact, there's a Amazon affiliate link down in the description of this video. You can go and buy that essay off of Amazon. I will get a little commission off of it if you follow that link, but you do not have to buy the essay off of the Amazon affiliate link. You can go and get the essay for free at the Mises Institute. So just type in Cantillon essay on economic theory. Again, if you go and follow the link down in the description, you can learn how to spell the Cantillon properly. And another way for me to get a little commission is for you to click on that link, put anything you want into your Amazon cart, and if you purchase it within the next 30 days, I will also get a commission off of it. So click on the link, anything you put in the cart for the next click on the link, take a look at the Cantillon essay, put anything you want in that cart for the next 24 hours, or everything you want for the next 24 hours. I will get a commission off of it, but then go and get the essay for free at the Mises Institute. Read chapters 6, 7, and 8. Part 2 of the essay, chapters 6, 7, and 8, the increase and decrease of money to the state, and the further reflections upon that topic. Read through those 3 chapters, internalize that information, and you will be amazed on how well you can see the underlying economic forces that separates the rich from the poor, that creates the situation that we are now facing. As far as trying to bring manufacturing back will be very difficult, if not impossible. Right? So go and read those 3. It's 3 chapters. You could probably read it in an hour or something like that. All right, what time is it? I gotta go. All right, I got a few more minutes here, guys, and then I got to go back to work. All right, I would love to see what countries are in debt development stage. You can escape to those countries. I would think like the Cantillon effect is going to be taking place over a very long time. It doesn't happen in the course of years. I mean, there's probably some effects that happen in years, but really we're talking, these are long-term economic forces, decades long. So if you want to know what country is going to be the one that's going to be growing in standard of living, I would look towards emerging markets. Look to ones that are doing well, ones that are producing and moving that production out of not their production facilities, but their produced items, selling that to foreign buyers, right? Those are the countries who are importing money and exporting stuff. They're going to raise their standard of living. So long as it's a friendly country to the people, How do I get access to the money first? You borrow it. Those are the people who have access to the money first, are the people who are borrowing the money, right? Because that's where the money printer, who gets right after that? People who borrow. So if you're borrowing money and then spending it on luxurious items, you are going to send yourself into debt slavery, right? And you are going to find pain and misery on account of it. But if you borrow that money and then you buy cash flowing assets, then what you're going to do is you're going to end up separating yourself from everybody else, because you're borrowing money and then actually getting a return off of borrowing that money instead of having to work to pay it back. People who have first access to the money and then buy cash flowing assets, those are the people you want to be. Right? That's all I'm saying. All right, first you have to have money, then they will loan you the money. Simple. Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to prove that you're going to pay it back. How much in savings is best to have for planning to have a child and support it for the first 2 years before a mom returns to work? Oh, Heather, that's a question that's really upon like how much your expenses are and how much you're going to really need. I mean, honestly, children are quite expensive and they are very much worth it. But how much you need for 2 years? A lot. Whatever it is you think you need is probably going to need more, because it's a lot. Cash flowing assets, I'm not coming down anytime soon. All right. It's why you need a great FICO score and job. Yeah, absolutely. You know, people ask me that all the time. How come you don't quit your day job? And I'm thinking, you know, it's guaranteed income. You know how nice it is to go out and borrow money when you tell them, hey, I got a 9-to-5 job that I've been at for over 10 years and it pays me this much, right? And I got a credit score over 820. You know, it's just like, yeah, that's a great position to be in. Right? But if you're trying to prove that you can pay it back, you know, with like, oh man, this is how I make all this income and stuff, and it was just like, it's really easy, man. Just call up, talk to my boss, and you can, you know, he'll tell you. All right. Alrighty, guys. I'm gonna read a couple more here, and then I gotta go. Wayne, Dad needs to make more to facilitate her to be a successful stay-at-home mom. Yeah, like my wife could stay at home, and she has at times, and like, you know, she has, you know, she's a teacher assistant, so summertime she's about ready to actually uh, go off of work right now. So for 3-4 months or whatever it is that she's off for the summer, I mean, she won't be working. Luckily, you know, there could be a possibility of collecting like unemployment insurance or something like that during that time, so she might be able to, you know, collect something from, you know, from that. But for the most part, no, I mean, I have to carry it for that time. All right, my advice is to borrow as much money as you can and buy cash flowing assets. That's it, man. That's like, I mean, you know, that's all of Robert Kiyosaki, you know, message essentially in a nutshell. You know, it was just like, and all the guys, all the people that I know who are super wealthy, that's how they did it. They all did it in real estate, right? Borrow money, buy cash flowing assets, buy a house, rent it out. Seems pretty easy, right? Yeah, I mean, this is what all these guys did, and now they're super wealthy. And people say, man, how do they get so rich? You know, it's just like, well, it's not like a secret. You know, it wasn't a secret. They tell you, you know, it's like borrow money and buy cash flowing assets. Right? The headache that comes from it, there's a lot. There's a lot of things that you have to know. You know, there's issues that would arise. There's problems that can come from it. But again, that's like with everything out there. You have to learn how to play the game, you know. All right. Robert is in a ton of debt, though. You're absolutely right. So is Trump, right? So is all these people, all of them. All of them are in massive amounts of debt because they borrow the money, which puts them in debt, and they position it in a spot that flows cash back to them. You have to be in debt to be in that cash flowing asset. Now, granted, a lot of people don't want to be in debt. I personally, I don't like being in debt. But if it was paying me, I might feel a little differently about that, right? Most people look at debt like consumer debt, like it's a burden. But if you look at debt as a benefit, because that's what this country really is a benefit to have that available, you know, cash flow to you through the borrowing of money to buy it. However, the people who do it separate themselves so much from the people who don't that it creates this huge inequality that we now face. Is it a problem? Sure is, right? But whose problem really is it? Is it the people's problem who are doing it, or the people who are not doing it? It's the people who are not doing it. So what are you, like, go do it, you know, go do it. Go be one of those people, you know. I mean, you know, we don't have to like it. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't like in the world, but I have to still go and deal with it, right? Same thing. This is one of them. I mean, try and vote for people who are going to prevent that from happening. You know, which, like, you think this guy's going to stop it from happening? This is how he played his game. This is how all of them play their game. Every one of them. They're all in bed together as the top 10% because they're the most important to each other. Man, I want to keep going. With 192 people watching, I think this is a great live stream to continue, but I have got to go back. I've got to go back to work. Deflation can't happen, Joe. I would be very cautious of that. Imagine right now if the elevated inflation expectation was to be removed. Elevated inflation expectation is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that there's going to be inflation going into the future, and so does everybody else, inflation will start to manifest itself through that reality. However, if you have elevated inflation expectation, but yet the CPI is coming in low, What happens if you remove all the inflation expectation? Would the CPI be even lower? Would we not be facing possibly a deflationary scenario right now if it wasn't for the insane amount of inflation expectation that is coming through the credible threats of tariffs and global supply chain breakdowns and everything else that's coming from it? Like, remove that inflation expectation and the inflation that is caused by it, where would we be today? CPI is at 2.1 or something like that. It very well could be negative. They are able to increase the inflation by the inflation expectations. Uneducated economist, you guys let me know.